How's it going, everyone? It's Spencer here with Spencer Stuff. Welcome to the community. I appreciate you being here. In my last review of the Onkyo TX-RZ50, I brought up the fact that you might be looking for that final 10% when it comes to performance in an AVR. So I'm going to jump right on into the review and give you that last 10% and talk about Onkyo's flagship receiver, the Onkyo TX-RZ70. Thank you all for watching. Starting off, I'm going to give you a little bit of a spec dump when it comes to the RZ70, and I'm not going to beat it to death as this has already been covered quite a bit in several other publications. Now, the RZ70 hosts 140 watts per channel at 11 channels driven. This is a difference versus the RZ50 only having 9 channels at 120 watts driven, and this will obviously differ in the amount of power that's going to the speakers based on what you're watching. Now, included with this is another upgrade. You're getting 2 independent subwoofer outputs versus the 2 single sub outputs. So what does this mean? It means minute bass control. You don't get that on the RZ50. Both subwoofers run at the same time on the RZ50, meaning you can't control each individual one. On the independent sub outputs on the RZ70, you can control each subwoofer, each level, and that is a great thing. The biggest spec when it comes to the RZ70 is going to be DIRAC, just like it was on the RZ50, and I can say it works the exact same on the RZ70 versus the RZ50. And as I mentioned before, this has 11 channels of amplification, but it also has 11 pre-outs, same as the RZ50, so if you want to run full external amplification, you can. And on the RZ70, you can also turn off the amplifiers, which is a great thing because it prevents heat buildup. So if you're wanting to run external amplification, you can, and you can shut the amps off. I'm very happy they added that feature on the RZ70. Now, jumping into all the codecs and everything else, you have SBC and AAC when it comes to Bluetooth, which I actually am kind of disappointed with at this high price mark. I wish we had some LDAC when it came to Bluetooth audio. You're getting your full streaming services on here and they work just fine. You have Dolby Vision, Dolby Atmos, HDR 10, 10 Plus. You have any DTS format you can think of, IMAX enhanced. You have Dolby, all of the different codecs with that. All channel stereo, pure direct, all this other crap. It's a feature. If you want it, you're probably gonna find it on the RZ70, similar to RZ50. So overall, this spec on this receiver is already fantastic. If you're someone who's a feature-rich person and that's what you're looking for, you're getting top-of-the-line specs when it comes to the RZ70. Now, getting into 2 channels driven, I ran the RP280Fs, the RF7 Mark IIIs, as well as my THX6000 LCRs, all of these from Klipsch, and my subwoofers were the RP1600 SWs. I mean, this receiver does a great job in 2-channel. At 140 watts per channel, this might bring you up over the next step if you're someone who is a 2-channel purist, and maybe you are looking to push lower ohm speakers with this receiver. You can probably do that when it comes to 2 channels. It'll give you a little bit more oomph versus the RZ50, which is a great thing. And if you're someone who runs multi-subs in 2-channel, this receiver is going to be what you're going to want versus the RZ50 only having the single control. So you get a little bit more musicality out of the RZ70, as well as this SABRE DACs. This is something that is a very important feature as well, and it's not really noted as much, but the SABRE DACs on the RZ70 do make a difference when it comes to the sound quality. You get a little bit less compression, a little more detail, and the high end, especially cymbals, really just pop out. And the overall sound is very clean and crisp and dynamic. And I know I said this about the RZ50, and I would say, you know, it's 90% of the way there. And I always say the last 10%, but the DACs do make a difference when it comes to sound quality. And especially as you turn the volume up, where the compression can become a little bit more obvious, the RZ70 does a better job than the RZ50 when it comes to 2-channel purity. I also noticed that when I ran the RF7 IIIs, it didn't struggle as much, and I don't even want to say the RZ50 struggled, but the RZ70 just felt like it had a little bit more headroom versus the RZ50. So if you're someone who is a 2-channel purist, the RZ70 could be a great feature for you or a great receiver, and I definitely recommend checking it out if you're looking for a 2-channel dedicated AVR. Now, getting into home theater, this is where the RZ70 really does shine over the RZ50, and it's tough because it's like that last little ray of sunlight. It's not like this huge discrepancy, but I just have to talk about it. First off, the pricing. A lot of people say, why is there such a huge price difference on the RZ70 versus the RZ50? And it has to be because of those last 2 channels of amplification you're getting on the RZ70. If you're someone who wants a coherent sound all the way through and no differences in amps, or the quality of the amps, the sound of the amps, you know, what characteristics they have essentially. The RZ70 is the only one that's going to be able to offer that. On the RZ50, you're going to have to supply your own amps for the last 2 channels. Now, if you're someone who's running less, you know, 5.1, 7.1, 9.1, you know, or a small Atmos system that isn't equaling out to 11 channels, then the RZ50 is going to be more than enough for you. But if you plan on going full 11 channels and using the internal amplification, the RZ70 is what you're going to have to use. Now, that being said, the other huge thing, and I think this is the most important thing on the RZ70 versus the 50, the separate bass control. I didn't think it would make such a huge difference. My gosh, if you're someone who wants nuanced bass, wants detailed bass, and something that's a little bit more coherent, more dynamic, and enjoyable in the system, and it's really going to anchor your system, the RZ70 just blows away the RZ50, and it is a huge difference. I didn't realize how much of a difference it makes having individual sub-controls, but after running DIRAC, running all my room correction and everything along those lines, that finite control that you can get in the bass just adds so much to the immersion. It doesn't feel as bloated. It feels like all the bass has a place. It doesn't feel like the room is struggling or that there's bloat in some areas and other areas there's not. At the listening positions, it's coherent, it's clean, and it's dynamic. It's so fun to listen to. And I know I use these words with the RZ50 to describe its sound. I have to use them again on the RZ70, but it's just that little extra step forward. The SABRE DACs too, and this is where I'm gonna talk about just the general audio. The audio on the RZ70 is cleaner, especially at loud volumes. I didn't notice it struggling. I didn't notice it, you know, having issues, I guess. And the more channels I got, I tested 5.1, 7.1, 9.1, 5.2.4, like any codecs I could find in between or any formats I could find in between. It was just taking them and running with them, and the processing was so good. It was so immersive. I really enjoy the RZ70 through and through. I never felt like it struggled, and it's something that I need to bring up. If you want someone that just isn't going to struggle and it's going to feed you everything that you want, the RZ70 is going to be excellent for you, and it's going to be a great foundation for your system. And if your ultimate goal is 11 channels of processing or 11 channels of amplification, the RZ70 is going to be the way to go. Now, included with this, I run the Buckeye Amps HypeX NC502 external amplifiers on my system, and the processing follows right on through with those amps. It sounds incredible. It sounds very enjoyable. And I have to say this, when I got the RZ70, it wasn't that huge step up I noticed. It was just basically the nuance. As I listened to it more and more and I watched more content, I was like, oh, yeah, the bird over there, it's more noticeable on the RZ70. Or like, oh yeah, that high frequency over there that was a little bit harsher on the RZ50, it's not as harsh anymore. It sounds a little bit more detailed. I would turn up the volume a little bit when it came to movies, and I was like, oh yeah, like glass shattering is absolutely horrifying to listen to at times. When I was watching Twister on the RZ50 versus the RZ70, everything just felt like it was in a perfect orb and it had a place, and it was horrific, like horrific. It was terrifying to listen to, and that's what you want. You want to feel like you're immersed and to be horrified when you're watching Twister at the beginning, because it's a terrifying scene. I felt like the RZ70 just kind of presented that more true to life experience versus the RZ50. That being said, the RZ50 was still no slouch. And I have to bring that up. If you're wanting that extra 10% of performance, the RZ70 is just gonna do it for you, and the home theater experience in general is a lot better. And for me as well with music, specifically all channels driven, all channel stereo, I found the music was a bit more enjoyable on the RZ70, although I wouldn't say it was drastically different, just a little bit of detail and a little bit more clarity versus the RZ50. But all in all, if you're someone who's wanting a home theater experience, wants to future-proof yourself, or who has 11 channels already and wants to just be able to run all the speakers on one set of amps or off the AVR, the RZ70 is going to be more than enough for you, and I really enjoy using it. Now, when it comes to the RZ70, I did some PC gaming, I did PS5 Pro gaming on it, and honestly, I had no issues. Everything worked fine. ALLM, VRR, 4K pass-through was no problem on the PS5 Pro, and I found that HDR was just fine. There was no issues with it. I didn't have to turn tone mapping on or anything along those lines, and I found the Dolby Atmos mixing with RZ70 from my PS5 Pro was fantastic. It sounded excellent. ALLM, VRR especially worked just fine. And I will say, this could just be a PS5 Pro. There was a few times where I might have had a few handshaking issues between the PS5 Pro to the RZ50, but I think it was because it was going from not using VRR to using VRR, and then I would go back to a menu and it'd take a little while to come back up. But it seemed like it was just once in a blue moon, I'd have like a bad day. You'd have a day where it's like, it's not working correctly. And then you just restart everything and realize that everything in here is a computer and stuff needs to be restarted every now and again. And then I would do that and everything would be just fine. So if you're someone who is wanting to buy the RZ70 for gaming, the full suite of HDMI outputs being HDMI 2.1 is a huge factor. And if you're a console gamer, you're not gonna have any problems. And I didn't have any issues as a PC gamer either. Definitely recommend the RZ70 for gaming. So one other thing I need to talk about before I get into the Wifey Factor, and I talked about this on the RZ50 review. If you're someone who watched that review, it's gonna be basically the same spiel. Speaker impedance is extremely important when it comes to any home theater receiver. If you're running anything below 6 ohms, you really need to consider external amplification or you're going to fry your receiver. On this specifically, if you're running 11 channels at 4 ohms, this thing is going to get very, very hot and you're going to kill your amps a lot faster. So make sure if you check your system beforehand that they are 6 to 8 ohms, and make sure you leave the setting at 6 to 8 ohms as opposed to 4 ohms on the AVR. I have to say this because it's just gonna sound worse when you put 4 ohms on there. I don't know what it is, but it just doesn't sound quite as right. There's more compression. It feels like the amps are kind of being dialed back in order to account for the 4 ohms. But seriously, external amplification is gonna be key for you if you're running low ohm speakers. I just wanna make sure that you protect your equipment because not a lot of reviewers talk about this because they get the product in and then it's gone. They're on to the next thing and they're just cycling through products. As someone who's had the RZ50 and now the RZ70 for over a year now, and over 2 years, I guess, with the RZ50, it's lasted because I take care of it. And included with this dust, make sure that you clean your AVR. Spray off the dust, use an air can, vacuum it out, clean the top because heat dispersion, heat kills electronics, and that's any device. You want to take care of this product if you want it to last. So that's all I have to say about this. Now let's get over to the Wifey Factor. So now I'm gonna give you the Wifey Factor. We're gonna jump on into that, something a little bit different because there are a lot of women out there who might not necessarily agree with home theater or not understand how it performs or what's enjoyable about it. So this is my wife, Mackenzie. So we're gonna start off, what do you think about the sound quality when it comes to this receiver?
I think the sound quality is really great. It's very detailed oriented and you hear all the little things.
So would you say in that realm it's very clean sounding, like dynamic? So like if something's really loud, it's very loud versus quiet versus loud, so it's a dynamic.
Absolutely.
And that can come down to the speakers too, which is, you know, we have Klipsch speakers in here. They're known to be very dynamic. So that's something that definitely comes into play. And being that Onkyo is owned by Premium Audio Company, they work hand in hand with Klipsch. So that means you're going to be getting the performance that you desire when it comes to movies. So would you say it makes movies more fun overall?
For sure. It feels like you're more in the experience of the movie and the story plot. You're more involved and it almost feels like you're there.
So would you say it creates almost like a 3D space in a way that like just becomes super immersive? Sure.
For sure.
Sure. So what about music? I know we've listened to quite a bit of music, not even just on the RZ70 in here, but the receiver upstairs in the living room, the RZ50. We've had the Sony STR DH590, which is up in our bedroom right now, and the Yamaha as well. Would you say that this is the best sounding for music?
Yes. Especially if you're listening to music in the dark, you are able to feel more immersed in the sound and really focus on all the instrumentation of the music that you may not normally hear on other
other tracks and stuff. Yeah, sure. So I would say overall then, this Wifey Factor is wifey approved. So the Onkyo TX-RZ70, do I think it's worth it to get those extra 2 channels of amplification, the individual bass control, as well as the SABRE DACs? this is where it's tough. If you're someone who's running a smaller receiver or a smaller system, the RZ50 might be better for you, but I will say the overhead on the RZ70 is definitely a lot better. If you're someone who wants a little bit more of a coherent sound where there's no amp discrepancies, the RZ70 might be better for you. With someone who's running full external amplification though, I will say the SABRE DACs do make a difference when it comes to external amplifiers, and I do think that the overall quality of the sound when running the RZ70 versus the RZ50 is better. So I do recommend the RZ70, but I don't think it's a huge step up. As I mentioned before, it is that final 10%, as I've said several times. But if you're that person who wants that last 10% and wants Onkyo's flagship AVR, I definitely recommend checking it out. I don't think you're going to be disappointed. It does everything better than the RZ50. It just costs more. So down to the cost choices, if the RZ50 is offering the same feature sets or a lot of the same features that you want and you can save a little bit of money, go with the RZ50. If you're someone who wants that last 10%, shoot for the RZ70, and with either decision you make, I don't think you're going to be disappointed. I really do enjoy the RZ70 for music, home theater, and especially bass. The bass is a huge step up, but the overall enjoyment factor when it comes to RZ70 is top tier. Definitely recommend it. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you have any questions, please leave them down in the comments. I appreciate you watching. I hope you have a great day, great evening, whatever it might be in your area, and I will see you all later. Thank you all so much for watching. See ya.